Welcome. I'm here today visiting with Mandy Jam about her horsemanship journey. And thanks, Mandy, for taking the time to visit with us today. And tell me a little bit about what you're doing now in the horsemanship world.
Well, I'm basically at the moment I'm in the south of Holland, close to it's a very interesting region. I'm right on the border between Belgium and Germany and Holland. So from my home to, for example, my horses are in Belgium and I'm in Holland. None of my horses have been in the Netherlands ever, which is interesting. And here I'm mostly I'm starting horses, I'm teaching, and I'm doing a bit of problem solving with people. Yeah.
So what just tell me a little bit about what's the horse community like where you're at? What do people do with their horses in that very international area that you're working in?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, well, it's the same everywhere, really. I mean, you've got the professional riders, and then you've got an amateur public where some people are more interested or more serious than others. And so I tend to work with the more serious recreational rider, people that are mostly interested in getting their horses, as healthy as they possibly can, on the mental side, but also on the physical side. So that seems to be a little bit where the attention is. Yeah.
And what's it's hard as an American to think about like having that many international borders that close together. It's kind of interesting. And tell me a little bit about the horse keeping landscape. Like how do horses live there?
Oh gosh, same as everywhere. I came here myself because as you know, I brought my horses with me from Estonia, where they lived a very free life. There was a lot of land, a lot of freedom. And then when I wanted to come back, I had to think about, how can I find a place for them where they don't have to be robbed of that freedom that they've grown up with, right? So that was a very a big consideration for me. It was very important for me to find that kind of baseline where they could have their freedom and their basic needs. So that kind of brought me to this region because there is a lot of land still. And so my own horses, they're a little bit of an exception. They live out in big herds on big pastures. It's very hilly where they are. And they're in separate herds now. I have a gelding and I have a mare. And because I wanted to sell the gelding at some point, I wanted to separate the two of them. Because they had been going through some moves together, and I didn't want them to be, too kind of attached. So I separated them, and they both are, I think, in herds of about 20 horses. And on some days it's very inconvenient. You gotta get your time in with your horses, and a lot of the time I'm looking for them first for 30 minutes before I can,
Yeah.
Before I have them. So, I think that kind of thing is, of course, an inconvenience for many people. And historically, of course, one of the reasons why, horses are kept in stalls or horses are kept in smaller, confined areas. Most of the barns that I come are like that, right? So there's stables, and then there is, small paddocks and maybe a pasture. Um, yeah, so it varies. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so and why have you made that choice to inconvenience yourself?
Yeah, it's very inconvenient. um, um, of course, I mean, from a personal perspective, things are, well, it's the same, isn't it? I mean, from both a professional perspective and a personal perspective, I want these horses to be um, as healthy as I can. I want them to be sound. I want their in the last few years, I think when I got to Estonia, where I worked with all those feral horses, I um, I found that I saw a lot of different feet. It wasn't as if all of these horses had very good feet because they were out and about. I saw a lot of hoof issues from a very early age. And so I started to kind of delve into hoof care a little bit more, and trimming. I couldn't trim at that point, but I kind of had to. So I started out doing that and learning as much as I could about that. And of course, once you start kind of delving into an area of horse, horse stuff, you can't unsee what you used to not see before, right? So when I was in the States, I didn't even think about feet, right? We didn't really talk about feet, and I was always a little bit afraid that if I would turn my attention away from the horsemanship, or from getting good in the horsemanship part, that the horsemanship would suffer.
Mm.
And I think coming, going out into the world, let's say, or coming back from the States and kind of starting out on my own, I started to be I started to be out on my own more. So I had to kind of learn things that before I didn't think was really necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And so forgot what your question was. Why do I decide to inconvenience myself?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that that choice says so much about, sort of why I'm interested in visiting with people who have horsemanship as a passion. There's a lot of choices that we make that are, because of empathy, or because of like how we feel. Like, we want our horses to have the best life, the most horse-like life that we can provide for them in the circumstances that we are in, and so, and a lot of people aren't bothered by making those choices, like, so I'm always interested about like what motivates a person to care, to have it be a priority, to make those decisions, because there's so many people who don't, and so I find it really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, like being with horses, for the majority of your days, you just start to see them differently. You start to look at them differently. You start to see more little bits and pieces. And then, the horsemanship does change the horses from a physical point, as well. So you start seeing the changes in the horses' bodies, and as the braces get less, right? You do see them improve in some ways, and in some cases really, really fast. So for example, if if I have horses in training, and you see that, you know, they've changed environment. I always make sure that if I take horses in, that I can provide at least, you know, even if I can't provide pastures of, you know, space or herds, or maybe, you know, they're only staying for a little, you know, a short amount of time, and I've got to, you know, separate them, or keep them in a smaller paddock or a smaller, you know, smaller space. I do want to make sure that I can, you know, that I can provide that baseline of having at least one buddy, you know, and having forage and having turnout, for an X amount, you know, of time a day. I did in the past have horses that would be in training, and I would stable them at night, because the stables were there and the owners would like them to go in at night. And then I did realize that that in some cases, you know, typical behaviors tend to remain longer than if they were to stay out with a buddy, for example, with, you know, enough forage. So if I can also in a training context, I try to be very particular about the management, because it's half the job, or that's, you know, that's the way I see it time and again, that, you know, if we can, even if we can, you know, only make little changes, they don't have to be dramatic changes, but they can be little changes, that it really helps with the overall development of that horse. So in my own, you know, in my own personal circumstances, of course, I just couldn't really. I was very much used to having, you know, to having this life where, you know, I would look out of my window in Estonia when I lived there, and I could see the herds, or I couldn't. You know, they're really far, but, you know, I could often see them, and it gives you that very nice, comfortable feeling, you know, that they're fine, because they're with their friends, they're out there, they've got enough to do, you know, they've got different things to eat, they can roam, they can, you know, they can travel, and it used to give me that very kind of like comfortable, that I wouldn't have to be there all the time to care for them. So then, you know, when I came back to Holland, there's this typical kind of very responsible kind of worrying attitude here, where we and I succumb to that too every now and again. My horse had my mare had an abscess in the fall, and, you know, you worry about it for weeks on end. There is this kind of like, you know, it almost goes together with being a horse owner, that you have to worry, right? And it's a little bit excessive. I think that the typical, you know, well-meaning horse owner in Holland is very concerned, and we try to do the best we can. It's just that the more we do sometimes in management, the more we spend, the more protective we are, the sicker they get sometimes, right? So for me, personally, I just want to have this. I want to have that kind of like that feeling that, you know, that I do everything I can for my horses to have a good life, also when I'm not around. So that I can travel, so that I, you know, if I'm not there, they're not bored out of their minds or locked up, or um, um, having all this excess energy because they can't really do anything with their time. But I have to say that that's kind of it is an exception, that I can keep my horses this way. I do, I do realize that, and it is inconvenient. They live out. I need to go and get them. I don't blanket them, so they're always, there is a lot to brush off of before you want to ride. There is a lot of inconveniences, but they're generally strong horses, and they're not often sick. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So
I must say, I think in a way, there is a growing trend here, where people are really reflective of how we keep horses. In a way, I think that's might be more here than in parts of the States.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about how, I want to talk about Estonia, but I feel like I want to go back further first. I want to get there, but so tell me a little bit about how you got your start with horses, and then I'd like to, and then how you came to the States to study horsemanship. So take us back a little bit.
Yeah, well, it depends on how far you want to go. I think what's like way back. I was a 10-year-old, and I was, I wanted to be with horses all the time. Classic story in a way. There wasn't a lot of money for me to go riding, and then I was fostered. So around the age of 10, I was fostered. I moved away from home, and there was a lot of kind of trouble in the family. And then when I got there, I asked them, could I please go and have riding lessons? And they said, yeah, you can. And so from then on, I was at the stable, right? So we had lessons once a week, and every day after school, I went there, and I I cleaned stalls and whatnot. And then this kind of went on until I was about 18, 19. Then I went to university, and then until about, I think, my 26th or so, I didn't really do a lot of riding at all. So by the time I got back into horses, I was mid-20s. I just finished my studies. And then first I went to the UK to learn some horsemanship there. That was also a very kind of different environment from where I'd come from. Then after that, I went to Belgium, and I think this is where I first, came across some old Reyhunt, old Tom Doran stuff. Also Eclectic Horseman issues from, long time ago. And this is, I think, where I first started to realize that, it is actually, there is a different, there's so many different horse cultures that you can learn something from, and that you have, that you could gain access to if you wanted to. It doesn't really take much to kind of open your horizon and just get out there to see what you can learn and to see who you can learn from. So that's kind of what happened. It did turn my whole life around. I did intend to have a very different career, and and do completely other things. I was in refugee studies, and I was doing academic research, and I wanted to kind of continue on that path. But that in the end, it just didn't go. It didn't go together with the horsemanship, so I gave that up. Yeah.
And do you remember like what was because you'd been out of horses and then suddenly you're like full on going to horses and sort of changing your whole life? Like, do you remember what that, like, how did that happen? What was the spark there? Why did you get back into horses? Do you remember?
Yeah, no, yeah, well, yeah, I just missed them.
Yeah. Yeah.
There wasn't really, these things aren't very rational, I don't think. I mean, I do remember that in the beginning, I felt like, oh, I've had such an academic life the last like 10 years. I've been studying so hard, but I also feel like I'm so kind of out of touch um, with my body and kind of being, away from, spending all your time indoors behind your computers reading books. I felt very kind of unfit as well. I remember that I just didn't feel like myself at the time. And I remember that it was a kind of there was a kind of a pull there. I just wanted to go and find horses. I wanted to kind of just this kind of very like childlike longing, that I think we all have. It's where where it starts with and what pulls you back to it every day, that you just want to be with them. I think, when that's no longer there, there's no point. So at that point in life, I just felt like way too pulled in one direction, and I kind of wanted to pause. I kind of wanted to stop for a bit. So I remember thinking, oh, I'll just take a year out. I'm in my, I can still do that. I'm not too old to take a year out. And then after that, the serious, I can start that real career that grown-up people have. And that just never happened. That never
And
happened.
do you in the 10-year pause that you had when you were pursuing your studies and you were away from the horses and then you went back, did you remember, was there like a perception change? Did the horse, did it feel like the same going to the barn as it did before that time away, or did it feel different when you went back?
Well, I have to say that, and the thing is, you forget certain things with time. But I remember, having these very vivid. There were these times when I was a teenager and we were at the riding school, very typical, very European riding school. Where there were rules there, you had to follow certain rules. Things are done in a certain way, and that was all very kind of still very very clear and very rigid, and therefore also very kind of orderly. And so what you got taught was a kind of discipline where you always do things this way. You lead your horse this way. You mount that way. You get on the left. You do things and all these different things. You do them in that particular order and in that particular way. And I was very good at that. I like to kind of follow protocols. And and it's safe, right? In a riding school where there's all sorts of people handling horses, you want there to be a certain kind of you want things to be predictable also for the horses. But I remember that there was this kind of like, on the other side of all that, there was this kind of um, this kind of this kind of longing to be, you know, to be close to that horse and to be and to experience that kind of unity with that horse, right? And we were so mystified by them, you know, we loved them so much, and it's all very much about, you know, how they smell and very sensory, right? And and I loved that too. And I remember that I felt like, okay, you know, but I'm always a little bit afraid that I'm doing things wrong, right? That I'm not following the rules. Um, um, and that kind of stood in the way of that sensory experience of just, you know, that being with the horse, and having that experience. So I do remember that, and this is not, you know, this is not super long ago, right? This is in the mid 90s, early 2000s, where there were already, you know, the Horse Whisperer came out at that point. I was 13 when that happened. We went to see the film, you know, me and my friend, you know, we went to see the film in a cinema like 3 times. I was mesmerized, you know, I was completely taken by that. And there were already some horsemanshipy kind of clinics happening. And so I went to a couple of those, and, you know, read some books. And so like me and my friend, we kind of started to kind of like do a little, you know, do some little things, do some hooking on, do some join uppy kind of things with the horses when nobody was around, you know, when nobody was, nobody was looking. Because we weren't allowed, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
you're only allowed to lead the horse on the left and to, you know, to do things in a certain way. So, you know, any kind of like loose, like hooking on kind of work, you know, it was not done. So we did that. And, you know, I was just kind of fascinated by that. So I kept on doing that. And so
So
I
what
think in a way, you know, it started kind of early, but it wasn't really allowed.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, but that kind of like that really didn't really leave me. So so by the time I got back to horses, I was, you know, it was a very irrational kind of decision, but it was also very real. Yeah.
So you've started, you're going to take a year off and you're going to go back and have some time with horses. So then how did you come to the States? What led you to do that?
Um, yeah, that took a long time. So I got to do this studentship in Belgium, where I learned a lot there. And this is where, you know, I started to realize that, you know, there is these different horse cultures out there. And Western doesn't mean, you know, Western doesn't have to mean that it's a discipline, right? Or you know. And so I watched some videos, um, and I think that's kind of the same thing, right? I think that when you're pulled into a certain direction, or when you're called into a certain direction, it kind of keeps calling you until you do something about it. So so I remember that that it took me about, I think it took me about almost a year after I'd been looking at the, what is it at that time, it's not there anymore, right? But the Legacy of Legends,
Mm-hmm.
the mentorship program, I'd been looking at that, and I'd been kind of thinking that, oh, I'm too old, you know, I'm too old to apply because I'm no longer 18, you know, it's kind of young people that apply for that. And by the time I was like 29 or 30 or something. So So I had been looking at the mentors there, and I had found that Mandy Bauer was the only female one, um, and I kind of was fascinated by that. I thought, why is there only one woman there in that list at that time? I'm not saying that it was always like that, but at that time, and I think it took me about a year before I wrote to her. Yeah. And I think also before I convinced myself that, you can always just try to go there, and see if you can learn something. Yeah. There is a kind of um, there is a line in Think Harmony with Horses, Ray Hunt's little book. There is a line in there in the beginning, and it says something like, and I don't know if I have it right, but something like, the more you can be around horses, or the more you can see people work horses, um, the more you can learn, or something. I'm not sure if that is the right. I
I'll have
should
to go
have
back
it.
and look and see if I can find the
I should have
quote.
it here, but yeah. But something like, the more you can be around different horses, the more you can work with different horses, or the more you can watch people work with horses, the more you can learn. And that somehow that stayed with me for quite a while, where I realized that, I was, at that time, I was studying to be an instructor, and I had, I probably had more experience than most, but I realized that, um, I really, I need more exposure, like the horses, right?
Mm-hmm.
We need exposure to gain experience, and you only gain experience if you get out there. Um, and so, for me, I think um, that was important also for myself, um, to really feel like I had the kind of, I don't know, that I had um, the experience to call myself an expert. So I was seeing a lot of things around me where, and also I think what is different here as opposed to there is that we've got lots of instructors here, or lots of horse trainers, lots of people working with horses on a very in a very small country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, and so, I felt that I just want to see lots more horses, and I want to have lots of them in my hands, and I don't want to have to, struggle to get that experience. So yeah, so that was an important motivation, and in a way, I think I always knew that there was more out there. Yeah.
And so how tell us about your time over here, and what was it, a big culture shock, or how, like, what do you remember what it felt like when you first got there and saw the horses and the teaching, and what was that experience like?
Oh, it wasn't long enough. It wasn't enough. It's never enough. I came in 2018, and then I came back for not a very long visit in 2019, and then it was COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very short after that. So I was meaning to come back the year after, and that didn't happen. So I think what well, I think everybody should do it, right? I mean, I think that, that kind of immersion um, in the horsemanship in a pure sense, so stripped from, um, stripped from things that come with running a business, where you need to do your social media, you need to attract your clients, you need to translate to the client what it is about. All that wasn't there. So it's a kind of it felt like a very kind of immersive experience, where you get up in the morning, and you do chores, and you ride horses, and then you do chores, and then you are tired, and then you go to bed, and then you do it all over again the next day. And while you're riding, and while you're doing stuff, you know that there is somebody watching you all the time. So we didn't really have, in Europe, I would have studentships, or have periods of internship with people, and maybe this is very it's usually like that in Europe, where if you intern somewhere, you are the one who does all the chores by yourself, or maybe with another student, and then you might watch your teacher ride, or you might watch your teacher teach, and you might maybe have a lesson with your teacher in the day, or maybe a couple of times a week. When I was doing it, it was 5 times a week we had lessons, or 6 times a week we had lessons. But some places, you might only get a half hour of a lesson every 2 or 3 days, and the rest of the week you're just doing chores. And there's a lot to learn from that. But I think what was very kind of different for me was that when I got to the ranch, and we were going about the days there, that everybody who was there helped out. So that really felt like a very kind of like a small community feeling, where you kind of live together, you work together, and you also things are tough, but you also have each other's back. So that's what I remember from that time, alongside that you're really trying to get better, and you're just you're getting better all the time. So it feels very progressive, and because you don't have to you don't really have to worry about it's just a luxury to be a student full time. It's kind of a luxury. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, other careers, I talk to my friends who have like real jobs, and they're going to conferences and professional development. And like, there is sort of this, when like it's accepted in those professions that you're going to go and gain new skills, and it's going to, help you when you go back to your job to do a better job and be more educated. And it's hard when you don't have the support of a educational institution or a corporation to get that development. But it sounds like you found some really great stuff. You sort of mentioned it.
I think we need that all the time. I think as horse professionals, I think like whether you are, whether you're a trainer or an instructor, or maybe you do something else with horses, you need that kind of continued education and development. And I think we tend to, as a profession, we're so kind of solitary, we work on our own a lot. I think we forget that you need that in order to stay, passionate. And
well, and you touched on it a little bit, but maybe expand a little bit about, like, I mean, that feeling of when you're there with other students who are as focused and passionate about, getting it as you are. I mean, that environment is so a lot of us are used to working on our own and maybe with the gaze of people who are like, what are they doing? As opposed to an environment where we're, sort of all on a similar page and very excited. And it is, I mean, it's a visceral feeling of when you've got that community around you. But can you talk a little bit more about your experience with the other students?
Um, let me think. Let me think. Gosh, I mean, I think we were with the three of us, or we were with the four of us, all girls, and in a way, I think because Mindy Bauer is one of those, exceptional female horsewomen, somehow there tend to be girls. I don't know. I think um, I think there is something about riding together that I miss. I really miss that. I really miss that. It's also that when you are with others that that you kind of you have each other's backs, you're less kind of worried about how you might how you might be judged, or how other people might look at you, but you're more kind of geared towards how do I help other people out by being aware of where they are with their horse. A huge thing about that time for me was that that everything kind of means something. So there is I think one of the sentences, or one of the things that I still hear in my mind, is that you got to be aware, you got to be aware of what's happening around you. And that's not just when you're around the horses, that's when you go about your life as well, right? But you want to, and that there is a kind of a, I don't want to be too theoretical about it. I'm trying to think of like practical, practical situations that we had, but I learned there how to be aware of other people and their horses, and how to kind of look out for other people. And I think, and also to not like, and I don't think that is practiced here, near enough. You've got, I come at stables and barns where, there's a lot of people in one place. There is a lot of horses like kind of packed, in a on a in a small space. And I think it's one of those things where if somebody passes another horse, you want to be aware of that space. If somebody ends up being kicked, it's not really the fault of the person who is holding the horse that's kicked. It's also it's everybody's fault. You just don't have to be in each other's bubble like that. So little things like that where you stop blaming, but you kind of start helping and looking out for each other. I think that's something that I think lives on ranches a lot more than on barns here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is a long time ago.
I know.
This is like 5 or 6 years ago. I kind of had to think like, how how was it there? What did we do there? And there's little memories that pop into my mind, but I'm not sure if there's a story attached. So,
Yeah, yeah.
oh,
Okay, well,
yeah.
so now take us to Estonia. How did that happen? And I know that you wrote an incredible piece in the magazine, and I'll put the link in the description if folks want to find that. But um, tell us a little bit how that came about, because that just sounds like a children's fairy tale book. So,
Oh,
feral ponies in the forests of Estonia.
yeah.
So tell us
And
a little bit about that.
foxes and all sorts of animals. Yeah. Um, yeah. So I could never have done that if I hadn't had that time at Mindy's. I could never have done that if I hadn't had access to that information. I did. I was way over my head the first couple of months. And I also I had in my mind that things had to be a certain way. So horse gentling or horse taming, or, it has to go a certain way. And of course it wasn't like that. So I think how that came about, I'm not even sure how that came about. I kind of got an opportunity and then I was there. A couple of months later, and then 2 months after that there was COVID, and just life just really just changed, and I just stayed there. So that's not really a very kind of interesting story, but generally I think that for me at least, like if I have an opportunity and I feel that it could improve my horsemanship, or I could get better because of it, or maybe I could at this point, being a little bit longer in the industry, I could maybe be of service somewhere. I'm gonna go. So it doesn't really matter if that's around the corner or halfway across the country or the world. Yeah, so I mean, I still had that thing in my mind where I felt like, okay, I'm a little bit handier, but I'm not, I'm all right, I'm doing all right, but I'm still not, I'm nowhere near a horseman. And I think we still, we all just, are on a path to somewhere. But for me, I mean, it was still just important to have as many horses in my hands as I could, and I didn't feel like I could have that by going back home and just waiting until maybe there was enough clients or enough horses, or I just wanted lots of horses. And so when that opportunity was there, I kind of just went, and I arrived there in December. It was pretty dark and cold, and I realized that these are untouched horses. They're not just horses that come from a breeder, or they're a kind of a breeder that breeds maybe 10 horses a year, but these were hundreds of horses. And they would be born on different sides of the island. I was on an island in the west of the country. It's called Hiiumaa, and the people that I worked for, they had, I think, I don't know, they had hundreds of colts a year, and they needed to somehow get gentled, get halter broke, get ridden, some of them, and so I couldn't really believe it, but I also thought that, okay, so this is where I need to be now. This is something that that not many people get to do. So they would come in kind of stock trailers, kind of packed, up on each other, and I would get them in bunches. So there would be maybe 8 or maybe 10 or maybe 12 little horses, and sometimes they'd be 8 months or a year, and sometimes they'd be 2 or 3 year olds, but all kind of skittish and untouched. And so I think that those first couple of months, I wasn't really kind of gaining ground, and but I was working so hard and I was studying so hard, and I was very much dependent on the space that I had. So in this article, I think I wrote something about how the space was organized and what I had to work with. So I didn't like I didn't really have a round pen. I did, but then I couldn't get them in there, and I didn't have like a I don't know, like a kind of a chute or something, or like
an alley,
like an alley to get them in there. I did have a kind of a square pen kind of place in the middle of the barn where I could kind of trickle them in. But first, every day I needed to go and find them. And this was a kind of a foresty kind of huge pasture where they could kind of hide. So usually I would take my dog, and I would let her, help me to get the horses in. Then usually, and this is, I think, where also in Holland, if I speak to people, it's a little bit of a shift for people to kind of realize that, horses are not just coming to you because they want to be with people, or they're not, horses are not just naturally curious, so that if they see a human, they want to go there. It takes a couple of days at least, before a horse might want to eat some grain that you have in your bucket. It takes them days to kind of get used to having that in their mouth. And then it takes days for them to realize that, I kind of like this. And then it might take days for them to kind of, get used to you coming out there maybe every day at 8 or something to pick them up. So generally, the whole thing where the whole setup was not really geared towards the work that I was doing. It was not easy to get these horses where I needed them, and then they were afraid. So that's just that, if there had been another, if I had been in charge of making the setup, maybe, things would be a little bit easier. But then I did learn a lot about space, and about using space, and about, simple things like, which is really not simple, the balance point of a horse, and how to use that to your advantage, and how to work with, how to, when there's, not enough pressure, and when there's too much, and how that just is very close together with horses that are more more closer to their nature. So I don't know, it's also really kind of feels like a different, like, it's kind of it was a different time for me. I still feel that I couldn't at the time. I think, I should have written more. At the time, I think I was so busy just doing the work, and I was so kind of like used to just being there by myself in that forest with those horses that I didn't really realize. Well, I did, but then I didn't, and I just wanted to do the work. So now that I'm more ready to maybe write about it or do something with that material, I wish that I had just made more notes, done more with it at the time with that kind of raw, experience. I do have notes, but it's not nearly what I would like it to be. But I think that when you're living something like that, you're not your first thought is not to kind of make it into history.
Yeah. Well, you're living in the moment, you're doing the work, and part of doing the work is being really present in the moment, so you're not always thinking about that it's going to be behind you. Like you're thinking about what you're doing
Yeah,
in that time.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I would do, I would go and do little things. I would um and I would take a lot of time um to watch videos, older videos, um and then take little bits from it, and then think that, oh, I'm going to apply that on that horse, and I'm going to take that to I think I've kind of I know about 6 or 7 or different ways to get a halter on a horse. um, who maybe they've been bitten by a snake before and they're really touchy on the nose. And then it's not really, those first experiences, it's not really a matter of just hooking them on and getting the halter on. It doesn't really work like that. Or maybe they're super protective of their left side. You can't even get to their left side. But you do know that you can help them better if you had them on lead rope. And what was nice, I think, about, in a way, I really kind of later on, I got into a kind of a rhythm, I think, where I started, I felt like, oh, I got to rope the horse, and then I have to just do exactly what Buck does in this early groundwork video. But I'm not a roper, and I hadn't been at Mindy's long enough to learn how to rope good. So, but I could do other things, and I think once I let go of the technique and what I needed to do, and I kind of stripped it to the principles and what it was about, I kind of started to really make strides and really get things done a lot faster, with a lot less trouble. And that in time, it became a little bit of an addictive thing. And this is why, sometimes I talk about, sometimes I would say, I've gentled so many horses, or I've done this and that. I don't say that very much, but sometimes I do say it, because I do think that a number matters. I do think that that there's a difference between working with 2 wild Mustangs or whatever and having hundreds go through your hands. I do feel that, once you get more feely yourself, or maybe not feely, but you get more handy and you develop more feel, and you can kind of work with the feel of that particular horse better. I mean, I do feel that it matters, that quantity does matter. And And I think that that's what first got me out there, that I wanted to have more horses in my hands, and I couldn't see how that would ever happen in the Netherlands, where, you know, where we are kind of, as professionals, we're all kind of working with a smaller number of horses a year, for example, whereas maybe in the States, it's more horses around. And so, yeah, so I think that, I don't know, it's just a lot. It's just experience, and in the beginning, I you know, but we need that experience, and then we need to be kind of real about that, I think, too, that we need it. We're not a horseman by just wanting to be a horseman. Yeah, yeah.
Well, and you touched on something that is that I'm always intrigued by, and it's you know, we want to develop to be the best horseman that we can be, and in the beginning, sort of the to me, it seems like the only way to start is to imitate people whose horsemanship that we find, like, okay, I like how that person's horses look, I like how they ride, I'm going to model myself after them. But then there comes this point where there's either you're going to stay in that path and you're going to be a poor imitation of you're never going to be that person. But then there's not so many people who go beyond that and say, okay, if I don't just look at the technique, like you said, I'm looking at the principles, you know, because now you've had that experience of starting and patterning what you're doing on somebody else, and then you've gotten on the other side of that, and you're developing from your own experience your own ways of doing things.
Yeah, and I mean, it does remain the same. I mean, and I think that, you know, the downside is that, you know, the more you've felt or the more you've seen, the more you also feel that you're falling short, and you're not enough. So it's, I mean, to me, I really feel like, you know, if some months go by and maybe I don't have a lot of horses in my hands, I feel like I'm wasting time, because there is a lot, you know, there is a lot to learn, and I think that's the downside of it. That maybe if you've, you know, if you've tamed 10 horses, you can feel like, you know, I have tamed 10 horses. And it depends. I mean, it just depends. But I remember that, you know, there was a whole period of time where I did struggle within myself about that, that I still wanted to. I did have an image in my head how it was supposed to be, and every time it wasn't like that, or a horse didn't come through like that, or maybe I got hurt, I had this kind of struggle, and there would be times of, you know, impatience or anger or frustration, or there was a lot of that, and I think that we have had some talks at that time, and I don't know, like some years ago about that, but what you realize that when you're alone, and you're, you know, you're in the mud, and, you know, maybe the circumstances or the facilities, or, you know, the setup is not how you would like it to be, you do realize that you're alone there, and that it doesn't really matter if anybody, you know, sees you work or not, but, you know, the horse is there, and that feedback, it did whereas when I was in the States and I was learning, the feedback of my teacher was most important, more important than anything. And then when you're with the horse, that feedback becomes more important. And I think that we need to go through that, to realize if we really like horses or not, or if if we really love them. There is this part in there is a video of Buck where he is starting a horse. It might even be called the first ride or something, where he's starting that big horse, and at the end of it, I think it's that video, but I'm not sure. At the end, it says something, he says something like, well, this stuff only really works if you love them. And I think about that a lot. We can have an idea of softness, or what it looks like when a horse, turns loose or really gets soft. And then, we can try to, it doesn't work. I mean, it doesn't work if in that moment, it can change from moment to moment, but from day to day. But if in that moment, if you don't love them, you can be a good horseman. I mean, you can be, you can be proficient at your technique, and your timing might be good, but they won't, it doesn't really work from the inside out. And I think that there have been times where, where I've started to feel that at that time with those horses. And I think that becomes what you're looking for in all of them. And then a lot of the time, now I've come back, a lot of the time there's things that stand in the way of that softness, that maybe have to do with, how the way that they've been kept, or the way that they've grown up, or the braces that have already been put in there. And it takes a while. Yeah? But I think that's what, that's what for me, it kind of, it does really, stay with me as what I wanna get. And then the way that I get it, is secondary to that. It doesn't matter if I'm a good roper or not. I did, and I think that, Mindy is probably one of the best people out there to learn your groundwork from, and to just learn your horsemanship from. But her groundwork is just exceptional. And I would never have, started to scratch the surface of that if I hadn't gone there. So, yeah. And it's interesting because, like, I like before, you would be a student, and you would be reading, and I like to read, and so, but not everybody does. And now I sometimes do this, I've done that a couple of times now, that I do a book club thingy where I read Bill Dorance's book with a number of people here. And every time I do that, I find out that, there is concepts, there is words that you can't really explain them. It's not even just a matter of translating them, but it's a matter of, you've got to experience it before you can really understand it. I'm not sure why I would say that, but it's just really hard. It's hard to learn.
Yeah.
I was going to say something about that, but I'm not sure. I don't know what it is anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you were talking about experience being the foundation. I mean, and that's and that and then yes, there's concepts that we can talk about all day long, and we can read the masters and we can watch videos and we can do all that, but until we have the experience in our own bodies in that moment, I mean, it's hard to really appreciate or even comprehend certain
Yeah.
concepts. So
Yeah, and then I think all of the quotes, observe, remember, compare, they become a lived experience more than something that, you quote. And they gain more depth all the time. And I think um, that's what I would wish for everybody. Um, but it takes a long time. Takes a long time, and then still, it's kind of evasive too. There's always moments where you feel like, oh, I wish somebody would have seen that. Or it's a shame that I'm alone now, and then every time somebody's watching you, or you're kind of it's something about the energy too, right? It's something else to just be alone with a horse than to be with an owner and their horse. um, there's a different dynamic to that setting, and there you also need to start, you need to be okay in that energy too, where you can still do the work without being too affected by maybe the setting or the who is there or who is watching, or that's a whole other deal, right? That's what happens when you go to a clinic, right? Everything is fine at home, and then somehow somewhere you're at a clinic, and it doesn't work anymore. And I think that also slowly, I think that that's a whole other thing. Yeah.
well, and you think, I mean, when you start, there's this the learning curve is so steep, and the progress happens. It's like those light bulbs are going on, and this whole world is opening up, and it feels like this quick rise. And then over time, you know sometimes you have other things in your life that take your attention or your ability to get your hands on so many horses, and you might go backwards. Like, you might not improve. Your skills might not feel as sharp, or you might not be riding as well as you did at a different time. And I think it's so hard as humans who are, I mean, very passionate about something and wanting to achieve improvement, to be okay with knowing, like, you just have to keep working at it. It might not always progress in a linear way, but if you stop trying, you're definitely not going to make improvements. And that's so hard, because I mean, for me, like, you feel like you should be making this growth over time, and that's not reality.
Yeah, it would be that this is, I think, why being a student, and being a full-time student somewhere is a luxury position, where I think maybe we don't always appreciate it when it's there, and why it's so important to keep, to keep going back to situations where you can be a student, whether you are, alone with the horses, or at a teacher, or maybe a different teacher, or and then you can you can forget about what a privilege it is to be in this day and age, right?
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
to be able to really spend time and really devote your time. I would and situations, life. This is the thing with horses, right? I mean, it just changes your life, and then your life changes because there are horses in it. So things are not so easy maybe as they are when you are free and maybe younger, to go out there and learn. I wish now, I could go, but I'm not so comfortable leaving my horses at home.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But there, yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it goes in waves, doesn't it? Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I would really, I think as long as we keep learning, there's hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's yeah. I don't like to, I mean, it's part of the job, it's part of the job, and it's part of just making a living too at some point, to to get yourself out there, to have a business, to show what you can do, to talk about what you can do. And I mean, it's part of it, but I don't think it should start. I mean, it can exist alongside, being a student, and remaining geared towards learning and being open. Yeah, yeah. But it's a balance there for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a mare who I took from there. Actually, I took her from Estonia with me, back home, and she's been, she was weird to start. She was she had, well, she still does. She has a limited range of motion in her forelimb. Um, there have been times where she she was plain lame, and she can still be, if I look, on some days. But I'm always working on, getting that horse better, and it feels more like a rehabbing than anything else at 3 years in. And I, that kind of thing where where you want to see, like, and some of us, of course, we have the luxury, or we we only get to work with really good horses. I generally, I get to work with, well, it differs. I mean, sometimes, I get to start some really good horses, sometimes not, but generally, I more and more, I think the challenge is to, to get to a point where you can get an average horse, or to help an average, like a physically, average horse, to the best, to the best possible health. So at the moment, after this whole Estonia experience, I'm much more, I'm starting to get a lot more interested in rehabbing horses, and to find the parallels between, for example, the groundwork that we do from from more the horsemanship tradition, to find out, well, to maybe start to give words more to why I do the things that I do, because this kind of groundwork, or this kind of horsemanship, it's still not done everywhere. I don't see it around me, right? It's still very rare, where I am. So, and I would dare to say in the whole country, I don't see a lot of really high quality horsemanship around. And I'm convinced that what we do, and I've seen it time and time again, is that the horses, they get better quite fast in their bodies as well. once we get them to mentally be available, once we get those braces to dissolve, once we get them soft, it feels like almost like, if there's braces or if there is blockages, the groundwork could in fact help them, like some bodywork sessions could, or some maybe chiropractic sessions could. And it might take a little bit longer, but I'm starting to be more and more interested in that part, and maybe to, you start to feel things that 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 you can solve, but you don't always know the words.
Mm-hmm.
So this is in a way how the horsemanship, it in a way where traditionally or maybe historically, we didn't have the words, or maybe, or we, I wouldn't want to include myself, but where maybe Tom Dorrance didn't have the words, but he did say it in his ways, or in his own way, or he did write it, but maybe not, in the way that people now would want to know, would be able to hear it. And so I don't know, it's just a different, different kind of ongoing challenge. And also, to realize that, even with those babies, and even though they are wild and pure and whatever, we want to think about them, you do have, you get 10 baby horses, and they all feel different, and maybe some of them already got hurt being born, or maybe they already fell down once, and some, like things are a little bit out of whack, and you already feel a brace here or there. And so, and then there is that inborn kind of feel where they don't all have the same feel, and so, as time, I just feel like, there's just so much out there that I think, is part of that journey. And it's not as if some parts are more interesting than other, but to me, I don't know, it just kind of goes in waves. Yeah.
Well, that sounds super exciting. I can't wait to check in with you and see how that is developing, because that sounds really cool. And we could probably talk about horses all day long or all night long where you are. Right. But is there any question that I didn't ask you this morning or this evening that I should have asked you? Yeah. Is there anything? Is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to visit about before we say our goodbyes today?
Oh gosh, no, I didn't know. I think we're good. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you for taking the time to visit. This has been really fun, and I want to check back in and see where you are with your language development of biomechanical groundwork, because that sounds
wow.
really intriguing. Yeah.
Those are big words to use.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Mandy. I'll talk to you later.